Hello, my best students, and welcome again to your channel, Native Flow. Today, we are going to explore one of the most misunderstood forces in human psychology: silence. And honestly, most people think silence is simply the absence of words. But psychology tells a very different story, because silence can communicate confidence. It can communicate fear. It can communicate wisdom. It can communicate pain. Sometimes, silence says more than an entire conversation. Think about this. Why does an awkward silence feel uncomfortable? Why do some people become nervous when nobody is speaking? Why do powerful leaders often pause before saying something important? Why do emotionally intelligent people sometimes choose silence instead of arguments? And why can silence make certain words feel much more powerful? These questions reveal something fascinating. Silence is not empty. Silence is psychological. It affects emotions, attention, relationships, communication, decision-making, and even the way people perceive confidence and authority. In today's world, we are surrounded by constant noise, notifications, messages, videos, conversations, opinions, entertainment, and because of this, many people become uncomfortable with silence. They feel the need to fill every empty moment with words. But some of the strongest, most thoughtful, and most emotionally intelligent people understand something different. They understand how to use silence, not as avoidance, not as weakness, but as a tool. And honestly, this skill can completely change the way people communicate and understand themselves. In this episode, you will discover why silence makes people uncomfortable, how the brain reacts to quiet moments, why silence can increase confidence, how silence affects relationships, why great communicators use pauses strategically, and how learning to become comfortable with silence can improve your life dramatically. And while listening, you will improve your English naturally through psychology vocabulary, communication vocabulary, listening practice, storytelling, and deep comprehension. So relax, listen carefully, and let's begin with truth number 1, why silence makes so many people uncomfortable. Before we continue, let me tell you something important. Watching free videos can help you learn, but real transformation happens when you stop consuming and start committing. That's exactly why I created the English Master course. This isn't just another English course. It's a complete English learning system designed to help you finally stop struggling and start speaking with confidence. Inside, you'll get step-by-step video lessons, practical exercises, worksheets, PDFs, books, direct WhatsApp support, exclusive bonuses, and a community of motivated learners who are on the same journey as you. But the most valuable thing isn't the content, it's the guidance. Because most learners don't fail because they're not smart enough. They fail because they feel lost, overwhelmed, and inconsistent. That's why you're never alone inside this course. When you have questions, you can reach out. When you need help, you can ask. When you lose motivation, you'll find support. This is not school English. This is real English for real life. English for conversations. English for opportunities. English for confidence. English for the future you want to build. And the best part? You don't just get access to what's available today. You'll continue receiving future updates, new materials, bonus resources, and improvements as the course grows. One decision today can completely change the way you learn English for years to come. So if you're serious about becoming fluent, if you're tired of starting over, if you're ready to invest in yourself and finally take your English to the next level, click the link below. Join the English Master Course. Learn once, improve forever. Let's begin your journey to real English fluency. Truth number 1. Why silence makes so many people uncomfortable. Let's begin with something you have probably experienced many times. You're talking to someone. The conversation is flowing normally. Then suddenly, silence appears. A few seconds pass, nobody speaks, and almost immediately, someone feels the need to say something, anything, even something unimportant, just to break the silence. Why? Why do humans become uncomfortable when nothing is being said? And honestly, the answer reveals something fascinating about the human brain. Because silence is not just the absence of sound. Silence creates uncertainty, and the human brain naturally dislikes uncertainty. Now think about our ancestors for a moment. For thousands of years, humans survived by constantly paying attention to their environment. Sounds often carried information, a voice, an animal, a threat, a warning, a signal. So when the environment suddenly became silent, the brain often became more alert. It started asking questions. What is happening? Is everything okay? Am I safe? Even today, parts of that ancient survival system still exist inside us. And honestly, this is one reason silence can feel emotionally intense. Now let's talk about social situations. Imagine you're sitting with someone you just met. The conversation stops. 5 seconds pass. Nobody speaks. What happens? Many people immediately start thinking, did I say something wrong? Are they bored? Do they dislike me? Should I say something? Notice something important. The silence itself is not creating the discomfort. The interpretation is, the brain starts filling the empty space with assumptions, and often, those assumptions are negative. Now, here's something fascinating psychologically. Humans are meaning-making creatures. When information is missing, the brain automatically tries to create explanations. Silence creates an information gap, and the brain rushes to fill it, sometimes accurately, often inaccurately. That's why one person may interpret silence as they are thinking, while another interprets the exact same silence as they don't like me. Same silence, different story. Now let's talk about confidence. This is where things become very interesting. Many insecure people feel pressure to fill every silence immediately. They talk continuously, explain too much, justify themselves, add unnecessary words, because silence makes them nervous. But confident people often behave differently. They can sit comfortably in silence. They don't panic. They don't rush. They don't feel the need to constantly prove themselves through words. And honestly, this is one reason silence is often associated with confidence, not because silence automatically means confidence, but because comfort with silence often signals emotional security. Now think about powerful communicators, great leaders, great speakers, great negotiators. They often pause deliberately. Why? Because silence creates attention. When somebody stops speaking unexpectedly, people naturally focus. The brain notices the change. The room becomes alert. And suddenly, the next words feel more important. This is why strategic pauses are such powerful communication tools. Silence gives weight to words. Now here's another hidden truth. Many people fear silence because silence forces them to face themselves. This is deeper psychology. In a noisy world, constant stimulation becomes a distraction. music, videos, messages, conversations, notifications, entertainment. These things constantly occupy attention, but silence removes distraction. And when distractions disappear, people often become aware of thoughts they've been avoiding: worries, regrets, questions, fears, dreams. And honestly, this is one reason some people avoid silence completely, because silence creates self-awareness. Now let's talk about relationships. Silence can have completely different meanings depending on context. Comfortable silence often appears between people who trust each other. Two close friends sitting together quietly, a couple enjoying a peaceful moment, family members sharing space without pressure. No one feels the need to perform constantly. No one feels forced to fill every second with conversation. That type of silence feels safe. But uncomfortable silence feels different. It feels tense, uncertain, awkward. Again, the difference often comes from interpretation, not the silence itself. Now here's something powerful. Emotionally mature people learn to become comfortable with moments of silence because they understand something important. Not every empty space needs filling. Not every pause needs explanation. Not every quiet moment is a problem. Sometimes silence is simply silence. And honestly, that realization creates tremendous emotional freedom. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. Silence is not the enemy. Silence is information. Sometimes it reveals insecurity. Sometimes it reveals confidence. Sometimes it reveals reflection. Sometimes it reveals peace. The question is not, why is there silence? The question is, what story am I creating about that silence? Because often, the discomfort comes not from the silence itself, but from the meaning we attach to it. Truth number 2. Why silence can make you appear more confident and powerful. Now let's talk about something that surprises many people. Silence often looks powerful, and honestly, this seems strange at first, because most people assume confidence comes from talking more, explaining more, proving more, defending more. But psychology often shows the opposite. Many truly confident people speak less than expected. Now think about this for a moment. Imagine two people in a meeting. The first person talks constantly. They interrupt, they explain every idea, they fill every pause. They seem desperate to make sure everyone notices them. The second person speaks less. They listen carefully. They pause before answering. They choose words carefully. And when they finally speak, people pay attention. Who appears more confident? For many people, it's the second person. Why? Because confidence often communicates itself through calmness, not urgency. Now, here's something fascinating psychologically. When people feel insecure, they often try to control how others perceive them. They explain too much, justify themselves constantly, seek approval repeatedly. And honestly, this behavior usually creates the opposite effect. The more desperately someone tries to appear confident, the less confident they often seem. Now compare that with someone comfortable with silence. They don't rush. They don't panic. They don't feel pressure to impress everyone immediately. That emotional stability sends a powerful message, even without words. Now let's talk about pauses. Many great communicators understand something important. Silence creates emphasis. Imagine someone saying, "This idea could completely change your future." Now imagine they pause for 2 seconds before saying it. Suddenly, the sentence feels heavier, more important, more memorable. That's because silence directs attention. It tells the brain, pay attention, something important is coming. And honestly, the best speakers in the world use this constantly. Now here's another hidden truth. Silence often communicates self-control. Think about arguments. When emotions become intense, many people react immediately. They speak without thinking. They defend themselves instantly. They attack. They interrupt. They escalate the situation. But emotionally intelligent people often do something different. They pause. They think. They choose their response carefully. That pause may only last a few seconds, but psychologically, it changes everything, because reacting and responding are not the same thing. Reaction is automatic, response is intentional, and silence creates space between those two things. Now let's talk about negotiation. This is where silence becomes incredibly powerful. Many experienced negotiators understand that people become uncomfortable with silence. So after making an offer, they stop talking and they wait. The silence creates pressure. Often, the other person starts talking first. Sometimes they reveal extra information. Sometimes they weaken their position. Sometimes they negotiate against themselves, all because they couldn't tolerate the silence. Now, honestly, this shows how powerful silence can be, not as manipulation, but as emotional discipline. Now, here's something interesting. Many people confuse loudness with authority, but true authority often feels calm. Think about people you naturally respect: teachers, leaders, mentors, experts. Many of them don't rush to prove themselves. They don't need to dominate every conversation. Their confidence feels stable, and silence often becomes part of that stability. Now let's talk about social confidence. A lot of people think confidence means always knowing what to say. But real confidence often means being comfortable when you don't know what to say. That's a huge difference, because life naturally includes pauses, awkward moments, unexpected situations, and confident people don't collapse emotionally when those moments happen. They remain comfortable, even in uncertainty. Now here's another psychological truth. Silence forces other people to reveal themselves. When you're constantly talking, you learn very little. But when you listen, people often tell you exactly who they are, their values, their fears, their priorities, their personality. That's why many emotionally intelligent people listen more than they speak. They understand that information flows toward the person who remains curious. Now think about leadership again. The strongest leaders don't always have the loudest voices. Sometimes they ask one powerful question, then remain silent. And that silence encourages deeper thinking from everyone around them. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not passivity. And silence is not fear. Sometimes silence is confidence. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Sometimes silence is self-control. And sometimes silence is the strongest thing a person can say. Because people who are comfortable with silence often communicate something powerful without speaking at all. I am not afraid of this moment. Truth number 3, how silence changes relationships and human connection. Now let's explore something even deeper. Relationships. Because honestly, silence can strengthen relationships, and silence can destroy relationships. It all depends on how it is used. Now think about this for a moment. 2 people can sit in complete silence. One pair feels peaceful, the other feels uncomfortable. Why? Because silence itself is not the problem. The relationship behind the silence is. Now let's start with healthy silence. One of the strongest signs of emotional trust is the ability to be quiet together. Think about close friends, a happy couple, family members who truly trust each other. Sometimes they can spend minutes, even hours, without needing constant conversation. And yet, the connection remains strong. Nobody feels pressure to entertain. Nobody feels pressure to perform. Nobody feels pressure to prove their value through endless talking. And honestly, that's a beautiful thing because many people spend their lives believing that connection means constant communication. But mature relationships often discover something different. Sometimes connection exists even without words. Now, here's something fascinating psychologically. When people feel emotionally safe, their nervous system relaxes. And when the nervous system relaxes, silence becomes comfortable. There is no need to constantly check, do they still like me? Are they upset? Am I boring? The relationship feels secure enough to survive quiet moments. Now let's talk about insecure relationships. This is where silence becomes much more complicated. Imagine sending a message. Hours pass, no response. Suddenly, your brain starts creating stories. Maybe they're angry. Maybe they're losing interest. Maybe something is wrong. Maybe they don't care anymore. Notice something important. Again, the silence itself isn't creating the suffering. The interpretation is. And honestly, this happens constantly in modern relationships, especially because technology has changed expectations. Years ago, people sometimes waited days for communication. Today, many people expect responses within minutes. So silence feels more intense than ever. Now, here's another interesting truth. Some people use silence as punishment. They stop talking intentionally. They ignore messages. They withdraw emotionally. Not because they need space, but because they want the other person to suffer. Psychologists sometimes call this the silent treatment. And honestly, this is very different from healthy silence. Healthy silence creates peace. Punishing silence creates anxiety. Healthy silence creates reflection. Punishing silence creates emotional distance. That's an important distinction. Now let's talk about listening, because silence plays a huge role here. Many people think communication is about speaking well, but honestly, great communication often begins with listening well, and real listening requires silence. Think about the last time someone truly listened to you, not waiting for their turn to speak, not interrupting, not giving immediate advice, just listening. How did that feel? For many people, it feels powerful because being heard is one of the deepest human needs, and silence creates the space for that experience. Now, here's another fascinating psychological fact. When someone shares something emotional, people often rush to fill the silence. They immediately offer solutions, advice, opinions, explanations. But sometimes, the most supportive response is simply being present, being quiet, allowing the person to process their emotions. And honestly, this takes emotional maturity because many people feel uncomfortable watching others experience pain, so they try to fix it immediately. But not every emotion needs fixing. Sometimes people simply need understanding. Now let's talk about attraction for a moment. This is interesting. Many people believe attraction is created by talking more, but mystery often grows through what remains unsaid, through pauses, through space, through curiosity. because the human mind naturally becomes interested in things it doesn't fully understand. Now, of course, healthy relationships still require communication. Silence cannot replace honesty. Silence cannot replace trust. Silence cannot replace emotional openness. But balanced relationships understand when to speak and when to simply be present. Now, here's one of the biggest relationship lessons in psychology. The strongest relationships are not the ones with the most words. They are often the ones with the most understanding, and understanding doesn't always require speaking. Sometimes, a quiet moment together communicates, "I trust you. I'm comfortable with you. I don't need to perform around you." And honestly, those messages can be incredibly powerful. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. Silence inside relationships is neither good nor bad by itself. Its meaning depends on the emotion behind it. Sometimes silence creates distance. Sometimes silence creates connection. Sometimes silence hides pain. Sometimes silence expresses peace. The question is not, is there silence? The question is, what is the silence communicating? Because often, the deepest messages between human beings are not spoken at all. Truth number 4. Why the most emotionally intelligent people know when to stay silent. Now let's explore one of the most powerful psychological skills a person can develop, knowing when not to speak. And honestly, this is much harder than most people realize, because speaking is easy, reacting is easy, interrupting is easy, defending yourself immediately is easy. But staying silent when emotions are strong, that requires emotional intelligence. Now, think about the last argument you witnessed. Maybe between friends, maybe between family members, maybe online, maybe at work. What usually happens? One person says something emotional, the other person reacts immediately, then another reaction comes, then another, and suddenly, nobody is listening anymore. Everyone is simply reacting. And honestly, many conflicts become bigger because people speak too quickly, not because they are bad people, but because emotions temporarily take control. Now, here's something fascinating psychologically. When human beings feel attacked, the brain often shifts into a defensive state. The goal becomes protection, not understanding, not learning, not connecting, protection. And in that state, people often say things they later regret, words they didn't fully mean, words they wish they could take back. Now, emotionally intelligent people understand something important. Not every thought deserves a voice. Let me say that again. Not every thought deserves a voice. Because having a thought and expressing a thought are two different things. And honestly, many life problems come from confusing the two. Now imagine somebody criticizes you unfairly. Your mind immediately creates responses, strong responses, emotional responses, maybe even angry responses. The temptation is to speak instantly, to defend yourself, to win, to prove them wrong. But emotionally intelligent people often pause first, not because they are weak, because they are strategic. They ask themselves, will speaking right now improve this situation? And honestly, sometimes the answer is no. Now here's another powerful truth. Silence can prevent emotional damage. Many relationships are not destroyed by major events. They are damaged by small moments of emotional impulsiveness. One sentence, one insult, one reaction, one angry comment. A few seconds of emotional control could have prevented years of regret. And honestly, That's why silence can be so powerful. It creates space between feeling and action. Now let's talk about social intelligence. Many people believe intelligent conversation means always having something to say. But socially intelligent people often know when to stop talking. They notice the mood of the room, the emotions of others, the timing of a conversation, the energy of a situation, and sometimes they choose silence because silence serves the moment better than words. Now, here's something fascinating. People often reveal more information when you stay silent. Imagine asking someone an important question. Then instead of immediately speaking again, you wait. Most people feel pressure to fill silence. And because of that, they often continue talking. They explain more, reveal more, express more. That's why skilled interviewers, negotiators, psychologists, and leaders often use silence intentionally, not to manipulate, but to create space. Now let's talk about wisdom. One characteristic appears repeatedly throughout history. Wise people usually speak carefully, not necessarily because they know more, but because they understand the consequences of words. Words can build trust. Words can destroy trust. Words can inspire. Words can wound. Words can solve problems. Words can create problems. And emotionally intelligent people understand that reality deeply. Now here's another hidden truth. Silence often protects your peace. In today's world, people argue about everything: politics, relationships, money, lifestyle choices, opinions, social media, everything. And honestly, many arguments produce no growth whatsoever, just stress, just frustration, just emotional exhaustion. Emotionally intelligent people eventually learn something powerful. Not every battle deserves participation. Not every disagreement requires correction. Not every opinion requires a response. And honestly, that realization creates tremendous freedom. Now let's talk about confidence again. Some people stay silent because they are afraid, but others stay silent because they are secure. Those are completely different things. Fearful silence says, I'm scared to speak. Confident silence says, I don't need to speak. And psychologically, those two experiences feel entirely different internally. Now, here's one final insight. The most emotionally intelligent people understand that silence is not the opposite of communication. Sometimes, silence is communication. A pause can communicate respect. A pause can communicate patience. A pause can communicate understanding. A pause can communicate self-control. And honestly, those messages are often more powerful than words. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something important. Emotional intelligence is not about saying the perfect thing. It's often about knowing whether anything needs to be said at all. Because maturity is not measured by how many words you speak. Sometimes it's measured by the words you choose not to say. Truth number 5. How learning to enjoy silence can transform your mind and life. Now we've reached the final truth. And honestly, this may be the most important one of all. Because everything we've discussed so far leads to a simple question. What happens when you stop fearing silence? What happens when silence becomes a friend instead of an enemy? The answer is powerful. Because learning to enjoy silence can completely change the way you think, feel, communicate, and live. Now let's begin with something many people never realize. Most people are surrounded by noise almost every waking moment. The moment they wake up, they check their phone, messages, notifications, videos, music, news, social media, conversations, entertainment. And honestly, Many people spend entire days without experiencing a single moment of true silence. The problem is not the technology itself. The problem is that constant noise leaves very little space for reflection, and reflection is where many important discoveries happen. Now think about this. When do people often get their best ideas? During a quiet walk, while sitting alone, while staring out of a window, while taking a shower. During moments when the mind finally has space to think. Not when the brain is overloaded with information, but when it becomes quiet. And honestly, this is one of the hidden powers of silence. Silence creates mental space, space for creativity, space for clarity, space for self-awareness. Now, here's something fascinating psychologically. Many people believe they know themselves well, but when they spend time in silence, they discover how little attention they've actually given to their own thoughts. Because silence removes distractions, and when distractions disappear, awareness increases. You begin noticing your habits, your fears, your dreams, your priorities, your emotions, and honestly, that awareness can be life-changing. Now let's talk about decision-making. One of the biggest mistakes people make is making important decisions while surrounded by noise and pressure. Everyone has opinions. Everyone has advice. Everyone tells you what you should do. But silence allows you to hear something different, your own voice. And honestly, many people spend years listening to everyone except themselves. Now here's another interesting truth. Silence often improves emotional health. Why? Because silence slows the mind down. It gives your nervous system a chance to recover. Think about how many people feel constantly stressed today. Constant stimulation, constant urgency, constant comparison, constant information. The brain rarely gets a break. And honestly, that can become exhausting. Silence acts like a reset button, a moment where your mind can breathe. Now let's talk about confidence one last time. Many people believe confidence comes from being heard, but some of the deepest confidence comes from being comfortable alone with your own thoughts. Because if you can sit quietly without needing constant validation, without needing constant entertainment, without needing constant attention, you develop a different kind of strength, a quieter strength, a deeper strength. And honestly, that strength becomes visible in every area of life. Now, here's another fascinating observation. Many highly successful people intentionally create silence in their schedules, not because they dislike people, not because they dislike work, but because they understand the value of mental clarity. They make time for walking, thinking, reflecting, reading, journaling, being alone. And honestly, this is not laziness. It is maintenance. Just like the body needs rest, the mind needs silence. Now let's talk about happiness, because this is where everything comes together. Many people spend years chasing more success, more attention, more possessions, more achievements. But sometimes peace comes not from adding more. Sometimes peace comes from removing noise, removing distractions, removing pressure, removing unnecessary mental clutter. And silence helps with that process. Now here's one final psychological truth. If you are uncomfortable with silence, that doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It simply means you haven't learned to trust it yet. Because silence can feel unfamiliar at first, even uncomfortable. But over time, many people discover something surprising. Silence is not empty. Silence is full of awareness, full of clarity, full of insight, full of possibility. And honestly, Once you experience that, you stop seeing silence as something to escape. You start seeing it as something valuable. Now, before we finish this episode, I want you to remember something important. Silence is not the absence of life. Sometimes, silence is where life becomes most visible. It is where you hear your own thoughts, where you understand your emotions, where you discover your priorities, where you reconnect with yourself. And in a world filled with constant noise, that may be one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Native Flow for more deep English learning podcasts about psychology, communication, mindset, personal growth, and human behavior. Keep learning, keep growing, and don't be afraid of silence. Sometimes it has the most important things to say.